It's no secret that the US media displays a pretty serious one-sided bias when it comes to Israel-Palestine, and there's all sorts of theories as to why. Many of them have a lot of weight to it. But what I found in my research is that quite a lot of the most prestigious and influential people in America's newsrooms actually used to work for the Israeli government, and specifically in Israeli military intelligence in a notorious group called Unit 8200. Now, chief of those is Axios's Barak Ravid, who this year actually won the prestigious White House Press Correspondents' Dinner Award for the best journalism of 2024. And at that ceremony, he was embraced by Joe Biden. There were speeches given about how wonderful his reporting is and how precise and how much of an insider he is.
The Aldo Beckman Award for Overall Excellence in White House Coverage, named for a former association president, the late Chicago Tribune correspondent Aldo Beckman, goes to Barak Ravid of Axios. The judges said Barak Ravid's reporting displayed deep, almost intimate levels of sourcing in the United States and abroad that produced stories closely aligned to the events that subsequently transpired. His stories put the reader into the room as decisions were being made in the tumultuous aftermath of the October 7th Hamas-led raids on Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, the WHCA is pleased to give the Aldo Beckman Award to Barak Ravid.
Now, Ravid, if you look at his articles in Axios, he's probably the chief person who pushes this. Biden is getting really sick with Israel. Biden is distancing himself from Netanyahu, stuff that we've heard for more than 12 months now, without any real consequences happening. Biden, of course, said, if Israel goes into Rafah, that's the last straw. We're not supporting them after that. Well, Israel went to Rafah and much further, and the Biden administration is still there. So Ravid is an Israeli, but more importantly, he was, until at least 2023, a member of Unit 8200, which is an Israeli military spying organization. In 2023, he very publicly said he would no longer serve there after Netanyahu overstepped his mark, going after the opposition in Israel. Now, who are Unit 8200? They are Israel's most elite and perhaps most notorious military unit. Unit 8200 are responsible for cyber warfare, for clandestine operations, and for many of the most infamous incidents that we've seen in the past few years in the world of spying and intelligence, including the Lebanese pager attack, which killed many people and injured thousands of civilians. And ex-Unit 8200 agents were behind the Pegasus scandal, this software that was used to spy on tens of thousands of politicians, academics, journalists, activists all around the world, including the Washington Post's Jamal Khashoggi, who the Saudi authorities were using Pegasus with permission from the Israeli government to spy on this guy, and then they dismembered him with a bone saw. So Unit 8200 is really the centerpiece of Israel's surveillance state. It is a daily reality for Palestinians that they are thrown into this massive dragnet of surveillance where their faces are being recorded constantly, where their every movement is being tracked, their texts, their calls with their relatives. All of this is being put into a huge Unit 8200 database. And this information is being used by this group to dredge up huge amounts of compromise on Palestinians. So, for example, if you are secretly a homosexual or if you are cheating on your spouse, Unit 8200 will know because they've got the receipts, and they will use that to influence you and try to turn you into an informant against your comrades and your neighbors and your relatives. Not only that, Unit 8200 is the centerpiece of the very, very controversial Lavender software, which assigns a score of between 1 and 100 to any Palestinian in Gaza. And the higher the number you are, the more likely they are in their estimation for you to be a Hamas supporter, Hamas sympathizer, or a Hamas operative. And if your number goes above a certain level, you are automatically put on a kill list. that Unit 8200 used this AI-generated kill list in Gaza to target tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza and turn that place into the world's biggest smoldering parking lot. So this is who Unit 8200 are. And there are a number of these former Unit 8200 journalists working in the United States. Ravid is one of them, but CNN also employs a number of them. For example, Shachar Paled, she spent 3 years as an officer in Unit 8200, leading a team of analysts in surveillance, intelligence, and cyber warfare. And then in 2017, she was hired as a producer for CNN to write segments for big shows like Christine Amanpour's show, like Fareed Zakaria's show. And then she later went on to work for Google. Another Unit 8200 operative who went to work for CNN is Tal Heinrich. She spent 3 years as a Unit 8200 agent, and then she became the news desk producer at CNN's Jerusalem bureau, where she actually produced and oversaw the news about Operation Protective Edge, which was the last time Israel started attacking Gaza. And so tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of Americans would have seen content produced by Tal Heinrich, who I will remind you is a former Israeli spy, that is being, sent to huge numbers of people all around the world as supposedly objective, factual reporting, when it is anything but. And it goes, beyond this. Of course, last year, I know you're aware of this, the New York Times hired Anat Schwartz, this ex-Israeli Air Force intelligence official who had zero journalistic experience. And she was brought into the Times so that she could report this ridiculous Screams Without Words dossier, which was almost immediately debunked by people in independent media. And it was so free of actual evidence about Hamas committing atrocities against women on October 7th that it actually caused something of an internal revolt at the New York Times. So, yeah, it is really extraordinary that people like this are allowed to just get jobs in a hyper-competitive industry. And we in the West, I've sort of been trained to see Israel as just like this sort of neutral state. Being in the Israeli military isn't, a problem. But I would ask anyone watching this to think, what if this was ex-officers in Russia's FSB or in Hezbollah intelligence? Would we think that was just normal for them to be working at CNN or the New York Times? I think the answer is no.
Yeah, this is really incredible. I read your piece kind of alongside this recent piece from Adam Johnson and Othman Ali from December 18th in The Nation titled How Sunday Morning News Shows Promote an Anti-Palestinian Agenda for Washington. And they did an analysis of the content on these shows, Meet the Press, ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Face the Nation, State of the Union at CNN. And they found that with the exception of one interview, Sunday news shows covered and debated the so-called Israel-Hamas war for 12 months without speaking to a single Palestinian or Palestinian American. With one exception, for a year, none of the major Sunday news shows even spoke to a Palestinian. On the other hand, on the other side of things, you're describing to me institutionally, an institutional reality that so many of the people who are writing and producing segments for these major programs aren't just Israeli or aren't just people who might, for other reasons, be sympathetic to Israel and have their own bias, but were in fact Israeli spies who operated within one of the most polarizing, I would argue, toxic segments of the Israeli military.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, there's no surprise to most people who've been following this that there is a huge bias there. That, of course, comes from the top down in the sense that the United States is a very close ally of Israel, and it's very rare for big corporate media outlets that are somewhat aligned with the United States government to really challenge Washington on anything substantial. But it's also the case that individual journalists inside the organizations are really not willing to do that, specifically because they have skin in the game, that they actually were participants in this. And it goes right to the top. I mean, if you look at the sorts of people who actually control a lot of these organizations, I mean, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, he volunteered to be a prison guard in the IDF during the Second Palestinian Intifada. And he actually, in his memoirs, revealed that he helped cover up prisoner abuse at that time and has faced zero consequences for it.
This is
Meanwhile, the
Jeffrey Goldberg.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And he says he's helped to cover up prisoner abuse.
That's what it says in his memoirs, that he talks about the abuse that's going on in these Israeli prisons, which frankly shouldn't surprise many people. And also probably not so surprising for people who actually cover this is that the IDF units that were actually perpetrating these crimes really faced basically no consequences for it. But this goes right to the top. I mean, the New York Times, I mean, their Jerusalem bureau, they own a property that was stolen from a prominent Palestinian family in the 1948 Nakba. You know, her name is Ghada Kamini, and we've interviewed her at Mint Press News, and the New York Times is aware of this. But you know that their outlet is actually directly participating in the ongoing displacement of Palestinians, shows that they are taking a side in this. And of course, lots of New York Times columnists actually have relatives that have served in the IDF, and they're proud of that. They're boasting about it. But that sort of thing, if it was going on the other side, you know, we've seen so many journalists lose their jobs because of taking mildly pro-Palestinian or mildly anti-Israel positions, criticizing Israel as an apartheid state, etc., etc. This is happening across the board in the West. And yet when people are revealed to be actually, you know, agents of Israeli or former agents of Israeli spying institutions or Israeli military, or another piece I wrote recently, which was called "Revealed the Israeli Lobbyists Writing America's News," found hundreds of people who used to work at institutions like the Anti-Defamation League or AIPAC, who are now in senior positions in management, in production, all across America's newsrooms. So it's institutional as well as systemic.
You open your piece with Barak Ravid in particular. This one journalist who, as you pointed out, was rewarded by President Biden last year for exceptional journalism. I don't want to skate over the sort of methodology behind the madness here. You know, what the effect of the kind of reporting he does is, because for people who might not be so online or might not pay that much attention to bylines, they might not understand the impression that is given by the kinds of headlines that Barak Ravid typically writes. And you alluded to it a little bit, but I just want to make sure we're really clear about it. I'm going to just read off a couple of examples from your article, and then I would love you to explain what you think these headlines are in service of, what the ultimate goals are. So here's some examples. Scoop: Biden tells Bibi he's not in it for a year of war in Gaza. Scoop: White House cancels meeting, scolds Netanyahu in protest over video. Biden running out of patience with Bibi as Gaza war hits 100 days. Biden-Bibi clash escalates as U.S. accused of undermining Israeli government. Biden and Bibi red lines for Rafah put them on a collision course. Biden on hot mic told Bibi we need come to Jesus meeting on Gaza. What's the effect of these headlines?
Sure. I mean, they are based on anonymous State Department or White House officials telling Ravid this, apparently. But they're the actual reason for them to be published and the output and what they actually do to the American public is to try to distance the Biden administration from the horrors of what's going on in Gaza. The reality is that the Biden administration has stood shoulder to shoulder with Netanyahu and the Israeli government throughout these atrocities, this ongoing genocide that is going on. And it is paying the price on the world stage, where the United States global public opinion has been falling drastically in the past 14 months. These articles serve as a way to try to whitewash American complicity in this genocide and to try to shift the Biden administration away from their very clear support of a genocide and make it look like they're an honest broker, a neutral party who's just trying to do the best, trying to, you know, do something for peace, and trying to make them look like they're not as guilty and as complicit in genocide as they truly are.
Yeah, and you see this narrative really embraced by a lot of liberal Zionists too, especially over the course of the last 14 months. You know, cannot deny the gravity of the humanitarian situation, the reality of the genocide in Gaza. So the pivot has been to, as the cognitive dissonance starts to ratchet up, well, it's not Israel, it's Netanyahu. And as soon as Netanyahu is gone, the fundamental project is going to be okay. And when you listen to more sort of progressive outlets, like a kind of a Pod Save America, neoliberal progressive outlets, you see them really leaning hard on this idea that it's really about Bibi. I don't know, a lot of people in the audience might have listened to the Pod Save interview with Hassan Piker, for instance, and there's an exchange where I think it's John Levitz pushes back a little bit. It can't really say, no, you're wrong, Hassan, about the genocide and the gravity of it all. But, Netanyahu, it's really Netanyahu. Maybe we can get that clip in here.
Yes, Israel is responsible for Israel's actions, but we do need to separate Benjamin Netanyahu and his conduct from the Israeli people. In the same, that doesn't mean they're not responsible in the same way that America is not George W. Bush, right? But America is responsible for what George W. Bush, when he is in command of our armed forces.
Yeah.
But we understand that distinction.
Of course. The problem is you have to also look at the Overton window, though, in any society, in any culture, in any country, right? And I think that, and I come from, I'm Turkish. Like, I come from a country with conscription. Like, I understand what ultranationalism is. I've lived through it. I've experienced it. I know what it's like when Turkish people hear me say like that the Armenian genocide is real, for example. Like, that's like a non-starter, right? That's like, you can't say that. What are you talking about? I learned in school that it wasn't real, right? Like, I understand how a country can become more and more right-wing, where even the liberal position is still committed to the maintenance of an apartheid. And I think that is where we're at with Israel, and we have to restrain Israel as we are the number one partner of Israel, whether it be the weapons that we give to Israel, whether it be the financial support that we give to Israel, or whether it be the trade partnership that we have, or the financial partnership that we have with Israeli companies. We have a lot of influence over what Israel does.
And so when you see how crucial that argument is to folks who want to continue to defend Biden and his Bear Hug Bibi strategy, want to continue to defend the Democratic Party, want to put space between the Democratic Party and what Biden has enabled over the last 14 months, these kinds of articles are in direct service to that. And then thinking about that and reflecting on Biden literally wrapping his arms around Barak Ravid at, the Correspondents' Dinner earlier this year, really raises some red flags about what these so-called independent institutions are really doing and how they're serving the public versus our political structures. I want to also give you an opportunity to go into more detail on what Unit 8200, 8,000, how are we saying this number? 8200 is kind of understood and sort of esteemed in Israeli society, so we get a better picture of how broad the reach is and why so many people who have served in that intelligence capacity end up in such sort of elite places in American institutions.
So in Israel, everyone has to serve in the military. It's mandatory. But you certainly don't get picked for Unit 8200 by mistake or by accident. It's described as Israel's Harvard. And the reason is Israel's got this burgeoning tech industry, which is known worldwide. And where do all of these recruits come from? It's actually from Unit 8200. That's where they come in, because this is where all of this military technology and all of these startups are incubated, and then they're sent out into the world. So you will find that very rich parents spend tens of thousands of dollars in some cases for lessons for their children so that they can pass the exams, so that they get chosen for Unit 8200. And the reason is that they know that if they spend 3 years in there, they are going to make the connections to mean that they will get jobs in the tech industry in some of these really big Israeli companies, or later on, maybe in Google, maybe in Amazon. So other investigations I found that literally hundreds of Unit 8200 ex-officials at Unit 8200 now work at all the big social media companies like Google, like Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. I found, for example, that there are at least 99 former Unit 8200 veterans currently serving at Google. And that is certainly an undercount because it's actually under Israeli law an offense to reveal that you were either currently or previously in Unit 8200. So those are the people that I was able to find on LinkedIn brazenly flouting Israeli law, saying, yeah, I used to be an Israeli spy and now I'm working at Google. So the real number is going to be much, much larger. So yeah, Unit 8200 is like the centerpiece of the Israeli surveillance state, and people compete. The competition is absolutely tenacious to try and get in there, because once you've got your foot in the door there, that opens up so many opportunities for high-paid jobs in the tech industry. And that's why it's considered the most elite unit in the Israeli military.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.